We're here today with Ben Harris. Ben, also known as the Superstar, recently did a talk at the Rural Nursing Symposium at Wellington, is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
And you were here today to do quite a few talks. The first one is on antibiotics and the resistance, was it?
It is indeed.
Yeah.
I think the key point is every use of an antibiotic breeds resistance. So it may well target the bug we're looking for, but it also treats all our other bugs, 90 trillion of them, and the only ones that survive are the resistant ones. So every use of an antimicrobial breeds resistance.
I wonder if I'm a culprit of that. How bad are we doing? Like, what's the trends that are going through at the moment?
The trends have to be measured by the tonnage of antibiotics used. And we have this amazing resource of antibiotics, and we're losing it. When I started work in 1974, there was 16 new antibiotics developed every 5 years and no resistance. Now there's endless and increasing resistance and no new antibiotics coming to market. In New Zealand, we're profligate users of antibiotics. For every 100 under 5-year-old children, every year there's 180 antibiotic prescription courses written for every 100 on average. The lowest antibiotic, that's phenomenal. And the lowest antibiotic year group is 25 to 29 year olds. For every 100 25 to 29 year olds, there's 60 antibiotic prescriptions written every year in New Zealand.
Oh gosh.
We're breeding resistance going gangbusters.
We are, aren't we?
And the antibiotics are running out and we'll not have them.
So there's nothing new being made in terms of antibiotics, you're saying?
Every month there's wonderful new promises coming to the market and they're fantastic. But we don't see every month a new antibiotic coming out.
Right.
We see one every 1 or 2 years coming out, or 3. And even most of those are only for the Staph aureus and such like. But the bigger worry still, and that group which is emerging much faster and has the highest death rate by far, is the E. coli's and Klebsiellas, and there's no new antibiotics coming for those.
And I was just talking to you earlier about our case we have up in Whangarei is a completely resistant patient that's come through.
That's right. CRE, carbapenemase resistant Enterobacteriaceae, which is a fancy word for I can dissolve all antibiotics. And we tend to think only those people that are carrying or known to carry the bug are the only one to have it. A few years ago, there was a case, the first case, CRE, was in Wellington, and everyone was petrified. It was somebody who came back from Vietnam and they're isolated to the nth degree. In the isolation, don't forget, each of us carries 90 trillion bacteria, so how you can ever isolate a flour bag and move it around, I don't know, but we must attempt to. Later that year, one of our regional semi-rural laboratories, a scientist decided he'd just look at the routine feces for a week, and he found 2 CREs in that 1 week.
Is that right?
So there's far more of about than anyone ever realises. We know in countries like India, Spain, Italy, the Mediterranean, the Balkans, Nepal, Tibet, Southeast Asia, these utterly resistant bugs, like I said, over 52% in India. So when any traveller, let alone any immigrant, comes from there, we may have an 80% chance of carrying it in our bowel when we get back. But because, and when we're not on antibiotics, we'll spontaneously lose it generally over a few months. That's the good news.
Yeah, that is the good news. So we can hold off giving out so many antibiotics. Maybe.
Absolutely. If we restrict the antibiotics and hold back, we will have them for longer. In 1943, when penicillin became available, all Staph aureus in the world was susceptible to penicillin. Now 90% of them are resistant. So methicillin or flucloxacillin was developed. And we know we catch most infections, not the influenzas, measles, but most wounds, urinary tract infections we catch from our own flora, our own normal good flora. In the South Island, 5 out of every 100 Staph aureus we routinely isolate from wounds in the community are now MRSA positive. In the Wellington region, 8 out of every 100 are MRSA positive. In the Auckland region, 13 out of every 100 are now MRSA positive.
Oh gosh.
In Southeast Asia, 24 out of every 100 are MRSA positive.
Scary stats.
It's seriously scary stats, and they're only going one way,
Yeah.
and we've got ever less to treat them with. So I guess my next key point, especially in the community, prior to antibiotics, although antibiotics on average give us another 10 years of life, prior to antibiotics, most infections got better themselves when they're light to moderate. So we should be seriously considering not treating the light to moderate infections, but monitoring them carefully. If they're improving, don't use an antibiotic. If they're getting worse, then use them. And if we keep doing that, we'll have antibiotics for longer.
Is there any difference between switching from an IV to an oral? Is there any have you noticed any trends and improvements there?
It's not going from IV to oral. Where the bulk of our microbes are, the bulk of the 90 trillion, is primarily in our gut flora. So there's a little bit of an unusual argument. The advantage of IV, there are some disadvantages of course, doing the IV and maybe increased risk of infection there, but at least it bypasses our bowel flora. The upside of oral is easier to treat at home and in the community, and people being discharged sooner. But depending on how broad spectrum the antibiotic is, it's more likely to be wiping out our 90 trillion bowel flora. So there's an upside and a downside. Augmentin, norfloxacin, ciprofloxacin, they're dreadful for wiping out bowel flora.
Yeah, I see. And then you get the problems with C. diff and things like that come
Clostridium
through.
difficile, once again, we catch from ourselves. It's a normal bug in about 8 per 100 of us adults. 50 out of 100 children, but 8 out of 100 adults. We go to hospital, we get treated with an antibiotic for a hip replacement to reduce our chances of getting infection, wipes out all the microbes except those that produce spores, which is the Clostridium, including Clostridium difficile. They then wake up sometime a week after the operation, realise they have no competition now, the spores germinate because no antibiotic and no alcohol will touch those spores. They have the ability to turn on a toxin gene, give us rampant diarrhea, and there's tens of thousands die in the Northern Hemisphere from that every year now.
Yeah, it's very serious. What's your view on the future in terms of antibiotics? It must be quite glum at the moment, given the trends that we're heading towards.
That's right. I think education and fear drive change. Unfortunately, fear drives it faster. So until we get more people we know that are not treatable with relatively simple infections from antibiotics, the fear factor will not kick in so fast. But it will surely come. We know from studies in the United States, they do surveys, and one I'm mindful of now was published about 3 years ago, where ED departments attached to teaching hospitals, so we hope they give fairly good medicine there, of cutaneous abscesses, they all lance them, which is good, half them irrigate them, but now only 15%, 15 out of 100 give a covering antibiotic to cover anything that's causing that abscess, unless the patient was diabetic, immunocompromised, or had cellulitis. So only 15 out of 100. 10 years ago, 80 to 90% of them use covering antibiotic. We have to become innovative in how we cut down antibiotics if we want to preserve this wonderful pool.
And Europe countries, they're doing things where they use one antibiotic and then switch to the next one sort of favourably. What's your
Switching
thoughts
antibiotics,
on that?
I just don't think there's enough known about it. What Europe did very well, actually, was banning, most countries have banned subtherapeutic use of antibiotics for animal farming.
Oh, right. Okay.
So in New Zealand we use around 57 tonnes of antibiotics a year still for animal use, 7 tonnes of penicillin, largely for drying off dairy cows. But I think it's still not known if you're using antibiotic A, for instance, for a urinary tract infection for 6 months, then antibiotic B for 6 months. I don't think there's enough data that I've seen yet to show that that's necessarily better than using A till it's tired than using B.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you for your time, Ben, on talking about antibiotic resistance. It's a terrifying topic for me.
Very welcome.
Especially
so
coming
fear
to
may drive change, and it
definitely.
might be useful. We not only need the prescribers not to prescribe, we need the public not to be asking for them.
That's right, yeah, and it's not the quick fix. It may be a quick fix, but not the long-term solution.
That's right.
Yeah, okay, right,
Yep.
thank you.
Welcome.